time, I need to give you exam back at the end of class today. And I've got too much stuff to cover, so I probably will still be talking and I should answer through something. All right, well, we're looking at aerobic guidelines for the time, the intensity, the frequency, the type of exercise, and this table was just giving you an easy visual if I'm comparing different types of intensities across articles or textbooks or anything like that. All right. Right, so if I'm using those continuums then, we're going to pick a set of distances or times or intensities to start the program, and then remember that we have to stress the system if we want to continue to see change and adaptation in the system. Okay? So I've got to be looking at how am I going to progress. So using the ranges that they gave us, how do I progress the program, the training program, if they want to see further fitness gains from that program. And again, that's going to depend who you're working with, because some people might say, you know, I want to get healthy and then I want to maintain health. I don't want to keep working towards getting fitter and fitter and fitter and fitter, right? So it depends on the person. So you can look at the type of exercise. If you're starting with someone that was relatively inactive, didn't move very much, you would give them a program that involved relatively low impact. Okay, so they might be walking or cycling or using the elliptical. So one of the ways you can progress the program would be to change up what kind of exercise they were doing. So you might make it something that's a little tougher. You might get them to start jogging, or maybe go on the treadmill and put the incline up nice and steep to change it up a little bit. We can alter the duration. We've got a range on that duration. So remember, minimum, we want around 20-30 minutes a day. Preferably, if I'm looking at fitness, aerobic impact, we should do that in a block. If I'm looking at health, then the health guidelines say I can do 3 lots of 10 minutes, right? And the upper limit for aerobic fitness is about 60 minutes a day. So after 60 minutes, you don't see a lot of increase in aerobic capacity. Or I can change intensity, or I can do a combination of any of those. All right? We're looking for adaptations in increasing Q, decreasing resting heart rate, decreasing blood pressure, hopefully impacting their cholesterol ratios, so we see higher HDLs and lower LDLs. Right? And then we should, particularly if it's a health program, we should be looking at the resistance training guidelines. So what strength work are they doing as well? So the Department of Health and Human Services guideline that you have for your project, your binder, is the aerobic guideline. 150 minutes of moderate to, or 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity a week. They're also strongly suggest that you do a minimum of 2 days a week of some kind of resistance work as well, right? We want to maintain muscle mass. From the age of 50, we start to lose muscle mass quite quickly. So the more muscle mass I can maintain, the better my balance will be, the less likelihood I have of falling, right? So the recommendations always have some resistance work included as well. So again, we've got these sections that run across all the types of exercising. Volume. So for duration, when we're looking at a resistance program, which typically in our minds, because most of us have done some kind of competitive athletics, we always jump to weight training. Doesn't have to be weight training, right? But the volume, the duration, how long I spend in the gym is dependent upon how many exercises I'm going to do, how many sets of each exercise, and how many reps of each exercise, right? So if I'm only going to do 2 sets of 10 reps, I can be in and out of the gym pretty quick, even if I'm doing 8 or 9 different exercises. If I'm going to do 4 or 5 sets of 8 reps of 8 or 9 exercises, then obviously I'm going to be in the gym for a lot longer. So if you're trying to encourage someone to do some resistance work, the duration, the volume can play quite a key role, because they're going to turn around and say, well, I don't have an hour and a half to go to the gym and train and then have to get a shower, get back into my work clothes, get back to work, right? So what can we do with the volume? What's the goal of the program? So if you look at table 13.6 in your book, then they give you a really super breakdown here of the volume and the intensity and how much rest you want, depending upon what it is you're trying to emphasize. Okay, am I emphasizing strength? Am I emphasizing hypertrophy? Am I emphasizing in muscular endurance? What's the point of the program? So frequency, how many times per week do we exercise a particular muscle group? So the recommendation would be twice a week that each muscle group gets exercised. So that immediately gives me lots of options. I can do a total body workout. So I'm going to do some kind of circuit where I do some arm work, some back work, some leg work, some abs, and I'm done, and I go to the gym twice a week. Or I can split the routine, and I can say, on Monday I'm going to do chest and triceps. And on Tuesday I'm going to do back and shoulders and biceps. And on Wednesday I'm going to do legs. And then on Thursday I can take a day off, but I don't need to take a day off because I'm not going to do legs again on Thursday. I could go back and do chest again on Thursday. So if you do a split routine, you can go to the gym almost every day of the week. Okay? So it depends, again, what's the goal, who am I working with, what do they like to do, what do they want to achieve from the program, depends on which kind of program I would pick and therefore how often they need to exercise. Okay. Type. What's my type of exercise? So we typically tend to think about free weights, barbells, dumbbells, kettle. What's it now? Everybody's into the kettle things, right? Could be using the machines, could be using bands. What about if I'm doing press-ups? What am I using? Press-ups count as resistance work. So what's the resistance?
Your body
Body weight, right? So chin-ups, press-ups, sit-ups. I don't even have to go to a gym and lift a weight if I can come up with a nice set of exercises for them to do at home that use their body weight. All right? I can do free squats. I can do one-legged squats while I'm making the coffee or whatever you want to do. Okay? Also, when we're looking at resistance programs, you want to look at the rest period. So how long a break in between sets am I going to give them? And how long a break between exercises? And that can play a role in whether or not the program would count as part of their aerobic activity. Right? Because if I'm going to do a circuit, and I can organize the circuit in such a way that I don't need to take a break, I can go from one exercise straight to the next because it's a different muscle group, then I can turn my resistance program into part of my aerobic program. But if I'm doing a traditional resistance program where I'm going to do a set of 12 and have a break and do another set of 12, that is not aerobic. That is clearly anaerobic, because even if you only take a 30-second rest, that's enough time to rebuild quite a lot of your ATP and phosphocreatine. So it depends how you set the program up as to whether or not you can argue for it being aerobic or anaerobic. What's my intensity? So I've got to have frequency, I've got to have intensity, I've got to have time, I've got to have type if we follow the FIT matrix. So my intensity when we're doing a resistance program is how much weight am I moving? Okay. So the gold standard for a strength measure, for an intensity measure, is a 1 rep max, right? How much can I move for 1 repetition? That's how strong I am. And then we set the program as some percentage of that 1 rep max. The problem with the 1 rep max is it's not a very safe exercise, right? Especially if you're using free weights, because the whole point of it being a 1 rep max is it's very, very, very hard. And so if I actually can't lift it, now you're in trouble and you can get hurt. So 1 rep max, really you need spotters, at least 1 spotter, preferably 2 spotters. You can't do a 1 rep max with someone that does not know what they're doing with that exercise, right? If they don't know how to squat, I can't do a 1 rep max, because it would be an invalid, if they're not squatting correctly, it's an invalid measure of their strength anyway. And B, they're going to get hurt, right? So it's safer to use a 3 rep max, even with your athletes. Why do a 1 rep max? What's the point? Right? A 3 rep max will often achieve the same thing as a 1 rep max. It's not quite as dangerous. Right? Or when we look at the actual FIT matrix, you'll see that I don't even, if I'm working with a regular person, not an athlete, I can just do an 8 rep max, a 10 rep max, a 12 rep max. And then I don't do a percentage of their max, I do the whole thing. This is how much weight they can lift for 12 and they can't make 13. Then this is the weight they do for a 12 rep set. So there's a lot of flexibility. Writing a really, really good training program is an art form, because there are so many variables and there are so many different options. And people who are very, very good personal trainers or very, very good strength and conditioning coaches are highly knowledgeable, because there's a lot going on that you can play around with to see improvement in these different variables. Right? Most of the time, if I'm going to progress my resistance program, then I'm going to be looking at increasing intensity and or volume, right? So if they're doing 12 sets with 5 pounds, 12 reps with 5 pounds, can they do 12 reps with 6 pounds? Or do I keep it at 5 pounds and say do 15 reps? Depends what it is I'm aiming for. Sometimes it's appropriate to look at the rest period. If I was giving them a minute or a minute and a half in between sets, can I drop that rest period down? Is that appropriate? Depends what I'm asking them to do in the set. Not if I'm asking them to do 4 reps with 90% of their max on there. Because set 2 isn't likely to be very good if they only have a 30-second rest there. So what is it I'm looking for out of the program? What am I trying to stress? What am I challenging? What's my long-term outcome goal? All right, now, when we look at the fit matrix, they don't include interval training as one of the parts of a health and wellness or even a fitness program, but interval training uses all the other things and puts them together into a different kind of format. Right? Many competitive athletes use interval training during the week, generally not every day, because it's highly stressful on the body. The idea behind interval training is that I can take that training period and by using this protocol I can increase the intensity and the amount of work they're going to do within that time period. So rather than having to add an additional session and increase how many times we meet, I can get a ton more work done just in that one session. Right? They're very effective if they're put together properly. Personally, I've never done any real kind of interval training. They didn't use it in gymnastics when I was back in the dark ages when I did gym. So it's sprinters, track athletes use interval training a lot. Swimmers use interval training a lot. I don't know about bodybuilders didn't, but things changed, they might do now. I don't know about team sports because I just don't know enough about what you do within your training, whether you use interval training. Maybe during a particular portion of your program, Coach LV would use intervals with you, right? So I use the same breakdown, intensity, time, right? So my intensity is going to be a percentage of my best time for whatever the length of the interval, or you can use a percentage of heart rate max, which I always like. Personally, very easy to measure, can't get it wrong. Right? The interval duration, so when I do an interval, I'm going to do a period of time that's quite high intensity, and then followed by a period of time that is lower intensity, and then the high intensity, and we just intersperse. Right? So, my interval duration, my hard bit, how long do I want that to be? Depends upon what it is I'm using the training for. Right? So if I'm doing interval training with a 100-meter runner, then their interval duration is going to be 10 seconds or less because I want to stress the ATP-PC system. Right? Because that's the system they need to be a good 100-meter sprinter. So I set up the interval training to stress the system that they're going to use. All right. If they're doing an intermediate length race, then I want to stress glycolysis, then my interval duration is going to be somewhere around 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and then followed by the low intensity interval period. And if we're using it to improve performance in an endurance event, then my interval needs to be 2 minutes or longer, so that I hit system 3. So then if I'm going to use interval training with a team sport, I would have to combine these appropriately to target the performance in the particular team game. So maybe if I decide my training program across the week is I'm going to have 2 interval training days in my whole week, and I'm working with a sport where they have to run really fast for part of the time, maybe one of my interval training days will be short sprint type intervals, and the other interval day might be glycolysis or system 3, depending upon what the game is that I'm trying to get them in better shape for. So you can mix and match depending upon what's going to fit what you need. Number, how many? Right? So the number depends on how many reps, how many sets, and their goals. So am I going to do 5 10-second bursts with a 20-second rest in between? Or am I going to make them do more than 5? How long should the rest period be? So rest, be careful with rest period when you're looking at interval training. They typically do not mean that I run as fast as I can for 10 seconds and then I stop and stand still and or sit down, right? Rest doesn't mean stop. Rest means low intensity. So I'm going to walk for X number of seconds and then I'm going to sprint really hard again. Okay? There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do it work to rest ratio. So I'm going to do a 1 to 2. So if I run for 10 seconds, I rest for 20 seconds. Or a 1 to 3, depending on what the intensity of the run is. Or you can do it on a recovery heart rate, which I think is a nice idea if you're working with a recreational athlete or someone who's looking at a health program, a health program rather than a competitive goal. Because you can say, okay, you're going to go all out as hard as you can for 30 seconds, and then you're going to just walk at a reasonable pace, right? Not this. But you're going to walk until your heart rate comes back down to X. And when your heart rate is X, then you run again as hard as you can for 30 seconds. Because if I'm getting fitter, what did we say when we did our step test? Okay? And we measured recovery heart rate. Why is step test a useful test of aerobic fitness? What's going to happen to my recovery heart rate? How quickly is it going to go back to, let me rephrase it, didn't ask it all. Okay, it will get back to close to resting in a quicker period of time, right? Remember that? So, if I use recovery heart rate, and I say, when your heart rate gets back to X, go again, as they get fitter, the amount of time it takes for their heart rate to get back to X will get shorter. And so their rest period will automatically get shorter as they get fitter. if you're working with someone who's not an athlete, who isn't really up on this stuff, that's a very good way of doing it, because you're going to shorten their rest period without them even, like, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to keep sending them a new program every day or every week. You just say, okay, I'm going to see you again in 4 weeks' time. Don't forget, when your recovery heart rate hits 140, run as fast as you can again. So from a management perspective, that's a very nice tool. What type of rest? All right. As I said, you could do something passive if you're doing very, very high intensity, short interval sprints. So you could say, okay, you're going to walk on the spot, or you're going to stand there and stretch. You don't stop moving, and then you go again. You don't see a lot of passive rest intervals in training programs these days. Okay. Active, particularly when we look at the lactate literature, if I keep moving, I shift lactate out of the muscle tissue into the bloodstream faster. So even for high intensity short intervals, I suspect that the trend now is to use some kind of active recovery. So I sprint as hard as I can, and then I jog, or I walk, right? Or if you're working with someone who's not very fit, jog for 20 seconds and walk for 30 seconds, and then jog for 20 seconds and then walk for 30 seconds, right? So there's all kinds, I mean, it's just as inventive and creative as you can be, you can come up with numerous different ways of using this information, right? And changing up the program is crucial, because if you have to do, how many of you have to do the same thing every single day? Anybody now? See, look how great that is. LV doesn't make you do the same thing every day when you go to the gym, right? So, because that's boring, and then we get problems with compliance, and we get people dropping out, or not, as soon as you're not looking at them, they're kind of pulling back on how hard they're working, because it's boring now. Right? So we've got to change it up as much as we can. So the greater the intensity, the higher the fitness outcome will be. Right? How often I'm going to train depends on what the goals of the program are. So intervals let you do the most amount of work with the least amount of stress on the system, right? So we don't see such high fatigue levels if we use some days as interval days. And there's lots of different variables for you to manipulate. So what's my structure? What's my overall picture of an exercise session? If we're going to do a formal exercise session, not just my raking leaves that I have to do this afternoon, because the wind this week blew the whole tree down. Higher leaves. So, first step, warm up. Always, always, always warm up. So that may be some kind of general activity that is not sport related, or it may be a specific activity that gets you ready for a specific skill you have to do within your sport. Right? So your warm-up could be a jog around the track, or it might be some specific form of stretching, particularly if you're in a sport where range of motion is important. Right? Then, step 2 is your activity. Surprise, surprise, right? So what is it you're going to do? You're going for a bike ride, or you're going down in the gym and you're lifting, How many of us warm up if we're going for a bike ride?
Not the first few.
I-
For the warm-up.
There you go. First few minutes I don't ride as hard, and that's my warm-up, right? But we sometimes are a bit sloppy depending on what it is. How many of us go down the gym and never warm up before we lift weights? You really? Well, wait, but do you lift your heaviest weight straight away? Do you do a light set first?
No, I don't think I do the light set.
Yeah, so the light set kind of is your warm-up. All right, so then you're going to do your activity. You may or may not stretch. So be careful with the stretching literature, because there's lots of argument going on right now about whether or not we should stretch before the event, particularly if the event is a power or strength event. The recommendation at the moment is you shouldn't do static type stretching before a power event, that if you're going to stretch, it should be something that's dynamic. Your book says ballistic, but I wouldn't go there with most people because ballistic stretching is dodgy. Right? Try to distinguish between stretching, warming up, right, and flexibility training, where I am specifically trying to stress the system and increase range of motion, right? You don't do flexibility stretching in your warm-up, never. Should you stretch? I think yes, but I come from a background where you have to stretch, right? You can't do gymnastics without stretching out first. Something's going to go pop. So, and then we have to have our cool down. Again, we tend to be very sloppy about cool downs. Right? We're pretty good about warming up, pretty good about doing a little bit of stretching just to make us feel less tight, but we're not very good at cooling down that isn't stretching, right? So we get to the end of our gym and we go and sit on the mat and we stretch out a little bit when we finish lifting, and then we leave. But we didn't do our cool down before we went and sat. We tend to be a little bit sloppy about our cool downs. But if you're writing a program for someone else, you want to remember to make sure to add that in. If I've got them riding their bike or they're down on the elliptical for 25, 30 minutes, then the last 5 minutes at least should be lighter work to cool the body back down. Right? Bring it back down. Help the body start to get back to status quo. Because you've stressed it a lot. There's a lot going on. Oh, good, that clock's right. Okay. All right, so detraining. What happens when I stop training? How long can I stop training for? Is it okay to take Christmas off? Right? So, what are the rules when we're looking at detraining? Detraining can be, I'm taking a holiday. Detraining might be, I'm really sick. Detraining might be, I'm injured and I can't train. So detraining can take several different forms. So when we look at aerobic training, then if we stop completely, right, then we see a pretty fast decrease in our VO2 max that we worked so hard to build up, right? And health benefits also start to drop down. But if I reduce the volume rather than quit, then we see that we don't see any drop in VO2 max. We see pretty stable aerobic capacity as long as we maintain the intensity. So for example, if I go running every day and I run for 45 minutes at 75% of my heart rate max, right? But I'm bored, or I've got a big deadline at work, or we have a family holiday and the wife's going to shoot me if I take 45 minutes off and leave her with the kids when she's supposed to be on holiday as well, right? Then what do? Right? So we're going on holiday for 2 weeks. I don't want to take 2 weeks off my running, but what we see is instead of doing 45 minutes 5 or 6 days of the week, if I go out and run 3 times for 20 minutes, but I maintain my heart rate at 75% of my max, then when I come back from holiday, I'll see very little impact on my performance and I can go back to my regular training program. That's very cool, because it's a win-win now. I don't have to give up and I don't have to get into trouble. Right? So if I'm an athlete, if I'm a coach, this I like very much, because my athletes have worked their socks off all semester and it's Christmas break. And I don't want to say, go home and have a nice break and don't do anything for 3 weeks, because I know that's going to be ugly. Right? But I can say, you know what guys, we've trained 6 days a week for the last 10 weeks. Why don't you just train 2 or 3 times, right? Here's some ideas of things you could do. Try to do something 2 or 3 times a week. Wouldn't that be great as the coach, right? Now you know they're going to come back. Hopefully they stuck with it because you didn't demand they did something every day, right? And they're going to come back and be in better shape, and you won't have to work so hard to get them back when they come back in the spring. So when we look at strength training, we also see that if we stop completely, we see a very big drop in primarily power, that's the first thing to go, and strength, right? But not size. So that's quite interesting when you guys stop training, right? It'll be a while before you have to buy a new wardrobe, because it takes a long time for that muscle to break back down. So at least 6 weeks to start to see any drop in size, and depending upon how much you trained and how big you were, it can even be longer than that. Anything less than 30 weeks off, then it won't take you, you'll see a big drop, but to get back won't take you as long as it did the first time. So that's quite nice if it's an injury and you have to take way longer off than you have planned, right? Not a holiday. But again, what we see, if we're looking at a break, a deliberate break, if instead of stopping, we opt to reduce the volume, then we see we can maintain strength for up to around 3 months if we keep the intensity up, right? So I don't change the amount of weight I'm lifting, but instead of doing 6 sets, I only do 2 sets or 3 sets. Right? And instead of going 5 days a week, I can just go once or twice a week. That's a big change. So if you're looking at a burnout problem with your athletes or yourself, right? I love training, but I just can't get motivated to go train because I've just been doing it for months and I need a break. instead of taking a complete break, you can change the program very dramatically and basically feel like you're not doing anything compared to what you were doing before, and you won't lose strength. So you could take a month, you could take 2 months, you can take up to 3 months with a very dramatic drop in volume and maintain strength, and then pick your program back up again if you wanted to. As we get older, we get a little less flexibility with this, right? I can't take as much time off as you can if I want to maintain what I've got. It's just the way it goes. You think that you work your butt off. I thought when I was in my 20s, if I work really, really hard now, that when I hit 50, that means I can slow down a little bit and I'll be nice and fit. Means you've got to keep working harder, because otherwise the drop-off is even more dramatic, right? Okay. I'm going to do exams. So I've got optimizing training. What I might do, okay, so tomorrow morning, I have not heard back from Dr. Barlow, so I'm assuming that we're not going over to look at the VO2 part. So I apologize for that. That's totally my fault because I didn't email him until last week. Well, I emailed him earlier in the semester, but I did not follow up and chase him. So tomorrow morning, we will look at the fit matrix and do an example. But I want to run through this optimizing training idea. It means I'm not going to have time to do the periodization. So when you look at this chapter, they have a lot of information on periodization programs for classic strength weight training type programs, as well as periodization programs for an aerobic, for a running or a biking program. All right? So you guys will need to look at that closely because I'm not going to have time to cover that. All right? When you come tomorrow on Blackboard, so we're going to look at the fit matrix. Remind me, if you have a chance to look at it and pull it out this afternoon, great. But there's an article on Blackboard, wouldn't you like to know, and it's talking about the ACSM fit guidelines, the most up-to-date version, right? It's not in the lab notes, it'll be in the classroom notes because I should have linked it in class. So tomorrow's lab is probably going to run quite long. Make sure you've got snacks, water, all that stuff. If anybody wants to, I will bring, once we finish talking, I will bring the skin fold calipers, the tape measures. If anybody wants to retake their body composition measures, if you had a goal in your classroom binder for your physical activity log that involved body composition measures, I'll have all those tools with me so that you can retake those measures. Friday we will not have class. You have Friday and Monday to work on your projects. They are due the first day back after Thanksgiving. Okay.